In the early 1970s, Santa Cruz was a sanctuary of redwoods and Pacific fog, a place where youth and mutual aid defined the local culture. But after a series of high-profile crimes, the national press branded this idyllic region with a grim, inescapable shorthand: the murder capital of the world. When we look back at this era, we usually see it through the faces of the men in handcuffs. True crime narratives often hand these offenders all the narrative power, turning a community's trauma into a profile of a killer. With Herbert Mullin, that focus almost always lands on his motive. He claimed he was sacrificing people to prevent a catastrophic earthquake from leveling California. It's a terrifying, bizarre hook that has dominated the public memory of the case for 50 years. But focusing on the killer's internal world leaves 13 real people in the shadows. Mothers, college students, and young children are often reduced to mere evidence markers, their lives eclipsed by the mythology of the man who took them. The real horror of Santa Cruz wasn't a delusion about shifting tectonic plates. It was the deliberate way a killer weaponized the invisible, everyday trust that holds a community together. In 1972, the roadside represented a social contract of help and movement. Stopping for a stranger or accepting a lift wasn't seen as a risk. It was an ordinary part of moving through the world. That contract was used as a trap for Lawrence White. When the 55-year-old saw a car with a lifted hood and offered to help, he was answering a call for aid that turned out to be a performance. Not long after, 24-year-old Mary Margaret Guilfoyle disappeared. She was a college student who simply accepted a ride to get across town, relying on that same assumption of safety on the road. These two deaths broke the logic of the highway. Mutual health and simple transit were no longer neutral acts. They had been turned into fatal vulnerabilities. The violence then moved into spaces specifically designed for refuge and absolute privacy. Father Henry Tomei was murdered inside his own confessional booth at St. Mary's Church. This wasn't just a homicide, it was a violation of a boundary that had held for centuries. The confessional is built for secrets and grace, a room where the vulnerable expect to be protected by both faith and custom. The danger was no longer limited to the margins of the highway. It had proven that even the most consecrated forms of trust offered no defense. In the rural neighborhoods of the county, knowing your neighbors was a tool for survival. Helping a stranger find a house or giving directions was a casual, neighborly obligation. That's why Kathy Francis answered a stranger's question in good faith. She provided the directions that led the killers straight to the home of Jim and Joan Gennara. The resulting massacre wiped out the Gennara family, Kathy Francis herself, and 2 children, 4-year-old Damon and 9-year-old David. This was the most intimate wound the community had suffered. Neighborly helpfulness and the privacy of the home had been used to build a map for murder. For teenagers, the state parks offered a margin of freedom. A campsite under the redwoods was a place to practice independence, away from the managing eyes of the city. Robert, Brian, David, and Mark were murdered at their campsite by a man who approached them pretending to have authority. He used the social reflex to obey a park official to corner them before they knew they were in danger. Finally, the violence reached a suburban front yard. Fred Perez, a man in his 70s, was killed while doing yard work in broad daylight. But here, the neighborhood's habit of noticing things finally worked. A neighbor spotted the car and recorded the license plate, providing the first piece of evidence that wouldn't wash away. That single act of attention stopped the killer, but it also forced a realization. No place, not the church, the woods, or a front yard in the morning sun, had been safe. After the arrest, the fog of uncertainty lifted, only to reveal a more devastating truth. These 13 separate tragedies were all connected, part of one moving danger that had been crossing the county for months. Survivors faced a difficult return to normal life. They had to drive those mountain roads and attend Mass again, even though the quietest corners of their neighborhoods now reminded them of where the safety had failed. The justice system eventually secured life sentences, but the law is powerless to repair a community's broken trust. If we only remember the killen's bizarre claims or the murder capital headlines, we allow the victims to be erased a second time. True justice in how we tell this story means honoring the 13 people who were simply living their lives. We have to return the focus to where it belongs, the depth of the lives that were lost.